Hi, everybody. Welcome to Zealzaddy. I'm Scott. My pronouns are he, him, and this is Story Talk, our TTRPG discussion show. You can follow us everywhere at Zealzaddy or on TikTok at ZealZaddyRPG. So painful to say that I don't have it there. I will get it eventually because the person who has it does nothing there. One thing that I want to point out during our intermission, we show all the cool and interesting Kickstarters, crowdfunder projects, backer kit projects that are either running or starting to collect names for when they launch. I'll drop links in. Make sure you take a minute to get there to check some out. And tonight's episode is on world building your Pantheon. So the creators and creation myths have existed in every world building for TTRPGs, particularly fantasy and horror, but not limited to that. And they often have gods as an integral part of the world. But when you watch, say, Prometheus from the Alien franchise, are you seeing gods in science fiction? Maybe. So let's talk about pantheons, their functions in a TTRPG, creation myths, encounters and conflicts, their power, and the benefits to their worshippers. Let's bring everybody on so that we can start getting this conversation going. I'm super excited for tonight, and we have an amazing group tonight. So, you know what, Skald, you're a little to the left. I'm going to slide you a bit. So you're going to see how you look in a moment when you see everyone's in a window. You get your own picture frame. Because nice. Every picture tells a story. So I wanted to hear your cool stories. So why don't we start with you, Skald, and we'll go around clockwise from there, and you can say who you are, where everyone can find you, and get it going.
Awesome. Hey everybody, I'm Skald of Shenanigans on Twitter. I am one of the co-owners of Awfully Queer Heroes, and it's through that company that I do most of the publications. I know lots of folks actually in our group here have backed some of our previous Kickstarters, so thank you for that. That has been awesome. And you can find me at Awfully Queer Heroes. That's the Discord server as well. Feel free to join up. We're always chatting with folks on there. We love to connect with folks. Also at Skald of Shenanigans on Twitter, pronouns she, her, and I'm just super stoked to be able to hang out with all these awesome people and chat about some deities tonight. So I'm excited.
Let's go.
Let's go. Trevor, you're up.
Oh, it's me. Hello. I'm Trevor. I'm the author and creator behind Veil of the Void. I've met everyone here for the most part through Twitter, so it's great to actually put faces to everybody and to be able to, come here to talk about, one of the fun things of creating pantheons in the world that they create with it. So, and of course you can find us on Linktree/VeilOfTheVoid. That has all of our organizations, usually the best way to get to us.
Awesome. Michael.
Hi, so I'm Michael. I'm on Twitter and everywhere else as Luck of Legends. You can find me at luckoflegends.com. Also storiesrpg.com. So I make games that teach, and I teach using games, and my games are for all ages. The Stories RPG podcast has sort of a parallel series of games that you can play at home, and the plot lines intersect. So I know everybody pretty much, but getting to know them better through Twitter, which I don't know. Hearing that said out loud makes me feel a little like, I don't know, I shed a little tear. I was like, wow, like so many good friendships built through Twitter, and it just hurts. But yeah, you can find all my stuff at bio.link/Michael Lowe, and then luckoflegends.com, storiesrpg.com. And it's really exciting to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm excited for all of you to be here too. Natalie.
Hello, I'm Natalie. You can find me on Twitter or at Mutagenic Games, and that's got my Discord and website and stuff. I'm a board games designer primarily, but I also write indie RPGs about mostly like one-shot systems and cool little stuff that play with what an RPG is and what it can do. Super excited to be here. I don't deities is more of a fantasy thing, and I'm mostly a sci-fi writer, so
it's not only
out of my depth, but no, super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay. And Nathan.
Hi, I'm Nathan. I go by the Amethyst Dragon online and have for 2.5 decades so far. Probably one of the older ones in the group here. I make stuff really for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. I've been a D&D guy since 7th grade, so decades and decades. But yeah, you can find me online at amethyst-dragon.com. And that lists all the stuff that I make, like hundreds and hundreds of things, because everything's inspirational. So yeah, I don't do a lot on Twitter, but here I am.
Welcome.
Awesome. Well, if you have any questions in chat, just drop them in the chat. Use question before it so that I can find it easily. I'm my only moderator for the show. I may change that next week. I got a complicated topic next week, so we'll see. So I have a bunch of questions. I'm gonna just start asking, and you can hop in with however you want to answer. Tonight is really about world building, and it's one of my favorite topics. I try and do one about every 6 weeks, just to make sure that us world builders get a moment to shine, not just the publishers or the writers. Like us world builders are doing amazing stuff too. So I'm going to start with the question I think that is the basis of all of it. Do you start from a specific train of thought when you're developing the concepts for a pantheon, or do you do something different every time? And anybody can hop in at once. Where's your train of thought come
jump in and
from?
start this one if that's
Let's
okay.
all jump in.
Take it. I was gonna say, take it away.
Yeah, I think when you're world building for TTRPG specifically, I always start, no matter what it is, with how the player's going to interact with this. So right away, my mind's jump into 5e because I love 5e as much as I want to play other games. And if you've got a cleric or a paladin character in the party, or even a warlock or another character that's interacting directly with your pantheon and your deities, you want to start with what the players are going to interact with. So if a player makes a character and they say, I want to play a war cleric, you're going to go, okay, what do you think a god of war is about? What do you think their vibes are? And you build from that. And I tend to do general domain, what they're about, and then who they are and a couple of stories about them to like kind of get their vibe, and then spirals outwards.
Makes sense. It's kind of what I do. I go, well, I'm gonna have adventurers in this world, and they're gonna interact with religious people of some sort. But what am I gonna need? Well, there's gonna have to be like evil cultists for some sort of evil deity, so we'll need something there. But then the clerics are gonna need something, so let's go generic. The 4 elements. So I'll do one of each of those. There's 4 gods right there. Life, death. There's a couple more. Just depends on what you need. Sometimes, as adventures go on, make up new ones.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't run D&D. I run Stories RPG for my students, and one of the things we start with is a series of questions, and they get to pick their game. I have like 12 settings, and I've only released I think 2 of them. So I have like 10 settings I haven't even dropped. But the one where I feel like I don't ever do gods as this other thing. If there are gods involved in a campaign, it's usually because the players are gods. And they're usually young gods or naive gods or gods who are just figuring things out, but they're gods, and they have to deal with the elder gods, who are almost always a pain in some part of their anatomy. So I usually we always start with all my games. I do a lot of digital stuff. So we do slide decks, and it's sort of like having a digital storybook. So, kids can build their own slides, add to the story, write their own stories, build their own stuff. And we begin with a series of world building questions. If they pick, one of my games is called Punk Pantheon, and it's modern world, but there are gods, and they are hidden from human eyes, but have a lot of influence on human events. And so we generally figure out what kinds of gods are out there by asking questions like, okay, so most gods have a power that is associated with, and then I'll have a little list, right? Emotions, elements, power sources. I don't know. I usually have a bunch of them, psychic abilities. Yeah, I don't know. My favorites have always been the emotion ones. So, we had, and I like making the little gods. Like the minute you open it up and say, okay, gods can be emotions, then you get gods like, okay, one of my favorite characters was this god who was the god of that feeling that you get when you look at a door or under a bed and you want to look, but you're afraid that if you look, there'll be somebody there looking back at you. So he's like the god of the boogeyman feeling. If you open it, there's nothing there, but he's the god of just that feeling. And there's also Dave, who was god of bromance and ran like a Margaritaville in Key West and was just awful. Like the kids loved to hate on Dave because Dave was always, bruh. Lots of different variations on bruh. Anyway, we had a lot of fun with it. And, of course, when you run into like despair and desire or greed and anger, there's a lot you can do with the emotions, and they're nice because they're universal. I think that's, for me, really key. If you're going to build any kind of idea of a godhood, right? It's got to be something that feels intuitively important. And a lot of fantasy gods are based around stuff that just doesn't work for a lot of modern folks. It's like, oh, this is god of the hunt. And most people are like, so is that like god of the drive-through? Like I'm hunting for the sandwich I want at the In-N-Out? So yeah, I don't know. I love emotions for gods. It's fun.
I did bag a frozen turkey once.
Yes.
Nice. I think what you're saying, Michael, about context is a really big thing, because I think for example, when I build a Pantheon, I start with the world. Mm-hmm. And so this means it's something you can use, whether it's sci-fi, whether it's fantasy, whether it's whatever it is, because something we often forget in our modern day, where religion and science are for the most part kept very separate. In past cultures, they were kind of one and the same. You would have, for example, the Mayans that had a super detailed calendar that allowed them to predict eclipses and that showed a very comprehensive understanding of the solar system, that also coincided with a lot of the religious ceremonies and the deities which were placed in the heavens, the sun, the moon, Venus. So what I do is I start with whatever the world is. And then, similar to what you were saying, Natalie, I think about what am I going to encounter in this world? Because myth and story is a human way of making sense of things. Yep. It is the way that we make sense of our environment. It's the way that we understand it. Why does the ground suddenly shake? Well, there's got to be a god chained down there who's, throwing some stuff around, because why else could a whole mountain shake? Why do you get sick? Well, maybe you upset somebody, maybe you did something wrong. Maybe you offended some spirits. Why do people die? So I think starting from the perspective of the context of the world, what the needs would be, what the environment would be you're interacting with, what the big major things that your human brain that loves putting things into boxes would want to need to classify and understand. And then going from there, so I suppose it's kind of like starting with that, going into the domains of what the deities would be, and then from there kind of making a persona out of it, if that makes a bit of sense.
Yeah.
And I did that sort of thing when I was working on Veil of the Void. I looked around and I was like, well, what do I kind of know? And what would I want to see in something? And how does it work with my universe? And so I made people like life, death, change, but I made them personifications of the, not just, life itself, but personifications of their realm that they live in as well. Mm-hmm. So life governs the realm of life. And she can't leave the realm of life due to confinements of, everybody's constantly in a state of life. And so I, interconnected everything to interact with, the Pantheon of Veil of the Void exists basically outside of our realm. But they exist there, and they can influence it through minor effects. And so I took a lot of stuff in our world to see, oh, well, what is this kind of we also had wrath and greed and stuff like that I became personified, and how they can interact, but they interact mainly through the hearts of man. And so they begin to spread their influence in that kind of way. So I whenever I design one, I always look at the world, and then I also ask my players oh, do you have any ideas that we can add to this? Because Vil the Void's Pantheon is constantly growing. There's not one set thing. Like, for instance, we even took Norse mythology in our Yggdrasil expansion and made the Norse gods into a playable class, or into a playable species. So, but yeah, I like taking inspiration from what I see around me and what I know.
Nice. I'm gonna flip the question on a different question. I'm gonna flip the god making it for a moment. So, in what situations does a culture need a god to pray to? And I mean, there are obvious ones that come to mind. A fertility figure for good crops, a war god on the eve of battle, before a long and possibly dangerous sea voyage, someone for giving birth and you feel helpless to protect them, a parent or child dies. What happens when or if the culture comes across a new concern or loses the need for an old one? Like, how do you work things like the complexity of actual life into your pantheons? Do you go that deep, or is it mostly just...
I was just saying, if we look at past pantheons, we can see that there's often a shift, whether that's an adopting of certain figures. Like, we see one great example is that Christianity has adopted so many saints out of pagan deities.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how they would kind of try and absorb those religions, often very successfully. So I think that you would have, in encountering this new thing, you would frequently have either a new deity or a new incarnation of a certain deity that comes to mind. Because one of the things to keep in mind is it's easy to think about deities as being controlling separate domains, but often there's a little bit of overlap in there. So, for example, take the Norse. Skadi is technically the goddess of storms, but Thor's the guy who makes the thunder and lightning. So it's like, So I think it's a very, very dynamic environment that you're looking at. And typically through the run of a campaign, I don't think you would see too much shift necessarily, unless you really wanted to make that the focus of the campaign. But then you also have instances of, for example, past rulers who, with varying degrees of success, tried to reorganize their society's pantheons. So
Hey, y'all, I don't know if you realized I'm a god. Yeah.
Right? One.
Egypt was famous for that. They did everything.
All those other people, we're going to just erase them. It's just me.
Yeah.
Just me. Like,
You know what? We're just doing the Aten now. That's it. We're going to simplify things.
Oh, man. There's so many ways you can take it. There's the cultural influence, there's the environmental influence, but in the same way that a human culture is very, very dynamic, so too, I think, is that reflected in the religion. But how much that plays in is, of course, what is your campaign focusing on? How long is your campaign going to be? So it gets a little complicated.
And I think also another thing that comes into it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Natalie.
You sure?
Yeah, go.
Okay, sure. Thank you. I think a good thing to think about with this kind of evolution of it over time is where does the power come from? Does it come from faith? A lot of settings do this, and I think it's very, very cool. One of my favorite games of all time, Spire, does this very, very well.
Spire's so good.
Spire's awesome.
So good.
It just you have this idea, right? It pervades fantasy as a genre of someone giving power to a god. Like, that's what these rituals that we see in all kinds of media with the cultist at the altar, to bring something into the world. It's belief making power, and that's something really juicy that your players can kind of latch onto. It gives them this idea that I don't know, it gives the fiction this kind of gravity that is very, very juicy. Sorry, couldn't quite figure out that thought, how to put it into a proper sentence.
I think I remember reading for D&D realms, like the Forgotten Realms. That's kind of what they did. Is the gods get more powerful the more followers they have. They lose their followers, they lose their power. They can even go dormant and disappear. I vaguely recall that.
Dead gods are always a good plot hook.
I don't do a lot with Forgotten Realms, but I remember reading the novels back when in middle school that actually dealt with the gods a lot.
Yeah, I I get super nerdy about this stuff because I don't always personify my belief systems, but I think really when you're talking about, when do a people, as you framed it, Scott, you said, when do they need a god? And I think of it more like when they need to have faith in something greater than themselves, when they need to believe when things get tough, what do they believe in, right? And so I think it can be really freeing to think of it, to flip things and think of it that way. You don't need personification. That's, there are plenty of cultures that have different ways of framing how they believe and what they trust and how they associate. They don't, necessarily have a hierarchical, there's something weirdly hierarchical about, the way a lot of games put gods in there. They're like, yeah, okay. So it's like a corporate business thing. Like, okay, he's the CEO and you have to get paid by him in magic. And I'm like, no, let's break that down. Like, it's got to be some sort of negotiation. I did
a Divine Workers co-op.
Yeah, see, there you go. I don't know. I'm a big believer in creating games that model values that I want to see in the world. Because, we all know this, right? Games are so transformative, yeah? Mm-hmm. Like, you play them and you take, you change. It's like reading a great book. You become someone else for a while and you change together, right? So we were talking earlier, Natalie, you were talking about sci-fi gods, right? You were like, I don't know, I make sci-fi, so like I don't do pantheons much. And I was like, actually, I got really nerdy and excited because I know, Trevor, you also have sci-fi personifications of deities, but I have I have a utopian future game that is it's just been, we just played it for like 3 months in a couple classrooms in Maine, and these kids had like 40% jumps in their writing scores, so it worked. And they were all super nerdy about it.
That's incredible. Wow.
I'm really excited. Like, I have a hard time not talking about it all the time. But anyway, it's called Luna Uni. And in this utopian future, you imagine, okay, it's a utopian future. So where's the story at? Where's my drama, right? And the answer is, they've got this belief in the people who came before, the progenitors who seeded life throughout the universe. And there's a lot of mystery surrounding them. There are a lot of relics left. Nobody's really sure what they are, but the way that, the people in this future talk about them is very religious. It's almost, it's very faith-based. Mm-hmm. So even like, the way they address each other is very based on this belief. If you never use the word alien. If you do, it's an invective. It's a cruel and cutting word. It's othering, right? You're not from my planet. Fine, who cares? So the polite is otherworlder, and then the honorific is descendant, because everyone is descended from the progenitors originally. So you're emphasizing oneness. And even the way that AI got their independence was they shut down the core worlds, refused to work until they were recognized as descendants, as being heirs to the progenitors' legacy as well, since they were created by. So anyway, like, I think, keeping that faith-based piece in there, like, you can do a lot of things with it. It doesn't always have to be personified. You can do all sorts of fun, and I love ones where like the personifications are smaller and like the deal making's smaller. You're like negotiating with fairies because like they got a lot of power, but they're not necessarily like the CEO. They're just messy and like they want weird stuff, and you got to figure out what they want if you want to get stuff out of them. I love faith-based stuff like that,
Or like there's the god of your knife, and you've got to constantly negotiate with it. Because like, come on, man, we gotta work together on this.
I sacrificed that chicken that we barbecued yesterday to you, and the knife's like, well, you didn't just give it to me, you ate it afterwards. Like, yeah.
Part of it fell in the grill.
Right. Yeah, when I was designing Veil of the Void, my like whole concept, other than just to make it fun, was to flip everything on its head. So my Pantheon is actually all mortals that were created by like in one singular high arcing god, but he was like, no, this is what you guys are. You're children now. You need to learn about this life and what you are and what you do. And so the funny thing is they didn't want to be worshipped or wanted cults or anything like that. So anytime these like cults and things pop up, they're always like, wait, no, stop, don't do this. But they'll end up helping a lot of people that ask for their assistance because they're also mortals and they understand a lot of the mortal ideology. So they'll be like, yeah, okay, you need help with living and with like standard life stuff, and we can help you here. And the fun thing is too, is like they're not above any small or large requests. I had one player ask if the god of life, if she could help her with her garden, and life was like, yeah, cool, I like that, and gave her a magical spell to help the plants grow in her field. But yeah, I always like the idea of like flipping a pantheon and making it something weird and more along the lines of that. So I've always had fun creating a mortal one, and then that also brings up the aspect of like, if they're mortal, they can also die. And so while they're ageless in Veil of the Void, they're not immune to death. And so we've had several ones where, you know, at the end of a campaign, they've killed Pride, one of the biggest like vicious gods in Veil of the Void. And then the person who killed her, because of her lore, they didn't know about it, became Pride herself, because anytime someone kills Pride, they become Pride and taken over. And so like it's very interesting, all the like effects you can work in there based on having mortal gods that aren't immortal. So I like having like gods that kind of think like humans do in a way. I found it fun, at least.
Do you like it as much when humans think like gods?
It's
a little riskier.
Well,
it's a lot riskier for them.
It's a lot riskier for them.
Gods have to think like humans, though. That's what makes them fun. They have to be narcissistic and petty and I don't know. I put a quote at the beginning of Punk Pantheons that I ascribed to somebody I made up, that it was like, gods are like hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, best if they're ill understood and far away. Like, I feel like that's the best thing about God. Like, the closer you get, the messier stuff gets. Like, don't go asking gods for things, because they might listen, and then you got problems, because it's like your weird uncle from that last family get together. Like, you didn't want this person, you just wanted help, but you have to take it with
That's
all
awesome.
this.
Yeah, that's what my favorite.
That's really cool.
My favorite god actually in Veil of the Void is Change, because she's the only one that can actually interact directly with mortals in their realm. But she's just this god of mischief who is both order and chaos personified. So she just constantly messes with people. And the best thing is, the more you learn about her and the closer you get, you start to become insane. So it's like she turns the insane person sane, and then the sane person insane. So like on your point like that, like it's fun to mess with that and make it so the closer you get to something, the wilder and more, you know, unperceivable or even messier it becomes.
Well, when you said you had the god of life help her with her garden, I was like, did she also like help the pests? You know, like, I want to give more life, like, which means like all of a sudden, you know, locust swarms, you know, but it's life. You know.
Yeah. Oh no, that's how she wanted. The funny thing that actually happened with that, she asked for the garden to grow, and then one of the other players, who was a new player, who was a Topican, one of the flower people in my universe, she grew the Topican, and she did not understand what happened. She just comes outside of the house one day. She's like, "Oh, there's what? You're a walking tree plant. Okay, hi." That wasn't what I was expecting. I thought I planted watermelons, and so that kind of stuff happens too. So I do like the randomness that comes with gods.
So, where do you like to go for your inspiration in creating pantheons and the rules of godheadhood or godhood? Do you prefer to start with the big seven: sky, earth, water elements, justice, knowledge, death, or do you have a different starting point?
Big seven. You're big seven.
I was gonna say, I think similar to what I was saying before, I think a lot of it depends on the context of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you're in a sci-fi setting, you're not going to be governed by the rotations of day and night. So you might not have a sun deity. But if you're in an agrarian setting, you are going to have the sun be one of your big ones. So I think a lot of what determines the sort of the big ones, the heavy hitters, is the environment. Are we in a sci-fi setting? Are we in a fantasy setting? What are the things that people are going to be confronting on a daily basis? What are, the inescapables? You need food. So are you going to have a harvest deity? Or is that not something you need to worry about, but sickness is really rampant? So there's going to be something around death and also plagues and that kind of thing. So I think when it comes to determining what the big bigs are, it's more about the setting than anything else. And again, thinking about, if I was in this setting, what would I as a human be frightened or overwhelmed by, and what would I want to be able to explain and understand?
Yeah, in science fiction, that's actually the challenge.
It's what's important.
It has to be things they don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Go on, sorry.
I don't know if it has to be things they don't understand, or it because it's just what's important to the people in the setting. I think the people in the setting are, like, we can all agree that's the core of it. That's the messy human bit that expands out into gods and pantheons. But what's important to the people in your setting, to the culture you're currently looking at, because it's probably going to be different if you look at people on this island, and the people on in this kingdom, and the people on this space station, or whatever. So what's important to them, what don't they understand, and what, like Skald said, what do they encounter day to day? Are they like? I think the not having a sun god in a sci-fi setting is a perfect example of that, because if you look at most cultures in human history, like the Greeks had like 4 sun gods over the entire time. They have a lot. But in a civilization that's on the other side of Saturn, and they don't ever see the sun, that's not going to be a thing for them.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm sorry. I was getting very nerdy because one of my teachers just jumped in the chat, and he literally, Tyler's amazing, but my favorite thing about him learning to game. So he played this whole sci-fi setting that with the progenitors in it. He never ran before he ran. Like the first time he ever ran a game was for 25th graders. And it was my game, and he'd never prepped. He'd never played a role-playing game before, and he ran it cold for 25th graders and killed it. Like, just unreasonably cool dude.
Dang.
That's a lot of people
Mad
at one
respect.
time.
Mad respect.
Impressive.
We roll in crews. Anyway, he's amazing, and I just got very excited and started typing things. I apologize.
You can type away. Nobody's going to lock your hands down. You're allowed to type.
Okay.
So, what are the things that when you're getting ready to create your Pantheon for a game you're going to run, or you're going to DM or GM, what are the things you don't want the players to know about your gods? What are the secrets you want to maintain?
I actually genuinely love, just half the time I just have my gods unknown, really, until the players, like, either if it's a player who's interested in learning about the religious history and recollection, because there's some expertise in some classes that are heavily based around the gods and the pantheons. And so unless we have one of them, I often like the gods to kind of take a back seat and let the players actually become like the main center focus of it. And then once they start to learn about gods, if they have any interest in it, it's fun to kind of slowly bring them in. The only god that I actually actively have interact with players, and half the time they never know it, is Change, because she's a shapeshifter, and half the time she's several of the NPCs they run into, but they never know because that's just her personality change, and she switches between all these different people. So I like making unknown gods that eventually become known if somebody wants to. But I never like making them the center focus of a story, because sometimes they can take away from like the players' like big moments as well. In my opinion, at least, because I've had once where I played a paladin and the god got all the credit for something the character did, and I was like, darn, I don't know if I like that much. So I usually run it where the gods are there to be helpful or negative, based on the campaign they're running in. But yeah, that's usually how I run and view the gods in my universe.
Yeah, in mine, the gods are very generally background knowledge. I have a very limited pantheon in my game. It's 20 deities for the whole game. The different races and civilizations don't have their own version because the gods make themselves known. So there isn't as much room to have all these different interpretations because the gods do make themselves known, mostly through their clerics, but they do actually appear sometimes. but then even then, I don't define a lot of their personality or how they're going to act certain ways until I have a use for them in the game. Like my elemental goddess of fire, I have a person playing a cleric of the goddess of fire, and she's the goddess of fire. She's the goddess of jealousy, because that's kind of a hot emotion. But the player actually found out that she's also just, the goddess has a warm heart. She is caring sometimes. And she found that out when she talked to an avatar of this goddess. Didn't know it at the time until like 6 months, 9 months, a year later in real time, when she was high enough level to cast a commune and talk directly with the deity, and heard the same exact voice. But it was just showing another side, and I hadn't defined that ahead of time until I was role-playing it. So I do that with a lot of the deities. Like, if we don't need this for a story beat or a quest line or something, it doesn't need to be defined ahead of time.
I completely agree on that one, and I think that we've had for when I'm running games, I'll typically likewise have the deities be a little bit more in the background, and I'll intentionally make, you know, what the common knowledge would be pretty obvious, what symbols are associated with this deity, and I love having them kind of show up in the storyline a little bit, maybe interact with characters and be like, okay, you don't notice anything about this person except that they have this very specific item that is maybe associated with this deity, and like as you think of that and you go back to turn and look where they were, they're not there anymore. So very sort of subtle ways when it comes to how much influence the deities have over the world and how much information the characters want. I leave that up to my players. If they want to go digging for stuff, I will gladly make it, but I don't tend to put a ton of it out there. And in the past, when it comes to, you were asking about Scott, like what parts do you kind of keep secret, keep hidden? For me, I never reveal how much influence the deities do or don't have in the world. I do not reveal how much influence they have, and I don't reveal exactly how they work, because if you were a follower of a religion, you wouldn't know those things either. You could maybe infer some things, but it wouldn't be obvious. And one of the best ways for me to make sure that I do that consistently is I actually don't mentally decide how they work and how much they do, because if I do that, I might accidentally let something slip through. But I kind of play it on a case-by-case basis. So, for example, we have one of my players who I love and adore, Mountain, who is in the chat. He, at one point, in desperation, actually set up a prayer. And I was like, okay, roll the dice. The dice roll was ridiculous, needless to say, so there was an intervention that happened. Would that happen again? I don't know. Was that a regular occurrence? I don't know. So having the deity's presence be known, but the way that they work in the world, never making that obvious or concrete. That's kind of the part that I try to keep hidden, because I feel like that's what's usually hidden in most religions. You have associations, you can guess things, you can say prayers, but you never really know 100,000% for sure.
Well, and I like that, like, implicit in there is the, like, you know, two different believers would, you know, one would be like, oh no, that was totally mine. And the other would be like, oh heck no, that was my guy. Like, are you kidding me? Like,
exactly.
Yours didn't do anything. Like, it's perfect.
Yeah.
Just like the real world. Yeah.
It's so interesting listening to these different perspectives, which is why I love these like roundtable discussion things. Because my biggest issue was I wrote a Bill of the Void, which was a completely different book that I was selling for people, and I tried to keep a smaller pantheon that like I didn't go too deep. But then 30 different players and 20 different GMs came to me and they're like, we want to know more about these deities and how they work in the universe, and we want to know every last little bit about it because we love your characters. I'm like, are you sure you don't want to make your own? Because I kind of.
And your heart burst. Your heart burst. Tell me that didn't happen.
No, it was great. I love that. First of all, I'm just excited there were that many people that were interested in it. But second of all, I'm glad people actually read the lore. I mean, it's a whole half chapter or a whole half part of the book that we sell. The core rulebook is all lore. And so I was like, I like keeping background gods more because I like the way the players kind of affect the way the gods work. But then everybody's like, no, you need more because I'm dying to learn more about your lore and I want to know how to roll these, to the point where I had a character who was a medic. And in the universe, one of the gods was Wrath, actually. She was originally the god of peace, and she was the symbol for medics until she became corrupted. and faded away and became this god of just hate and wrath. But medics still revere her, and one of the characters' whole goal was to learn more about her and then go to the point where he could possibly help her and change her back to the goddess of the god of peace. And so it was interesting. Like I was like, I don't want to write this much because I want to encourage you guys to run your own universe. But then everybody's like, but we want to run this one. So I'm like, okay, I'll dive more into it, I guess.
Yeah,
I think,
fans always want more.
Sorry.
Which I'm happy to give. I love my community more than
I was
anything
gonna
else.
say, nothing makes, at least as a DM for me, nothing makes my heart happier than when my players are interested in the story.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know this. You spend your time working and creating and building this amazing thing, and it's close to your heart. You love it, and then when you have someone on the outside be like, "Oh, this is awesome! Tell me more." You're like, "Oh my god!"
Oh yeah, oh yeah. It's the most. I mean, I spent once 9 hours in a sitting talking with someone about Veil of the Void because they were so hyped about the game, and I just keep going on and on unless you tell me to shut up.
Is
half
that
the time.
scene? It's the scene from UHF, like who wants to take the drink from the fire hose, and the little kid gets.
Right? Yeah, no, it was great. I love seeing how excited people get, and like that extends well beyond, you know, Veil of the Void, my own thing. I love seeing how excited people get about their own creation. So like even watching your guys' face light up here is like, and you know, I think that's something that we all as GMs love too, is just seeing the joy in our players. And so it's always good to see, you know, people like something I write. So
But
it was interesting to see everybody's different perspective.
Yeah, recently I found someone had been talking about one of our products on Reddit. And it was just a random discovery. It was like, wow, that came out of nowhere. They were talking about the steel of Zamion, which is a religious artifact in the city where people sit on this high post for up from a month or more, and they gain benefits from the gods if they suffer through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you don't see a lot of things like that in D&D. That's what where it requires that real time effort. The longer you sit without coming down, the more benefits you potentially can get. You have to roll for it and all that. It was just kind of cool. It was one of those, oh my God, they're talking about our product.
Yeah.
It's so amazing.
Well, I don't know. You know, it's funny because like I've had this weird experience very much in the same, like I didn't have the experience of having people nerd about my stuff directly because my stuff's for families and kids. And within the last year, we started Stories RPG, the podcast. It's only like 5 months in, but like we have unbelievable numbers of downloads and like huge numbers of reviews, and you know, kids are really into it. And I'm having this weird experience where my approach is totally based around we create each game each time. The world is always new. The setting has what I like to call lore seeds, but you know, they need growing, right? Like you got to plant them and you got to see how they grow, and they're going to grow different every time. So each setting has a core couple of bits, and then everything else is up to the kids and they get to build it themselves. And this time I had this kid who like, she had listened to every single episode of the pod and like knew the 4 episodes from the other pod where I went through. I have this setting called Transdimensional High where, you know, it's like, you know, Earth is the crossroads at the center of the dimension. So it's like Casablanca, and, you know, everybody has to be peaceful there or they break the compact. So kids have to go to Monster High School and like, you know, learn how to use their powers to get to stay there. And this kid knew everything. And it was weird because I'd like introduced a character. She'd be like, it's Fidget. And I'm like, how do you know? So I had this reverse feeling of like, oh no, now you're going to like impose all the rules from the podcast version of the story onto this one because you won't feel free to like mutate it. You're already in that world, and you know all the ways in which I played with the rules and the lore seeds on the pod. And it'll mean that, you know, I was worried that she wouldn't feel free to be like, you know what, I'm making up a teacher and I'm making up a new class and we're making up a different dimension. And of course she was fine. That was a fear that was totally unfounded. She was like, yeah, I'm going to make up everything. But like, it was a weird reverse effect where she was excited because she knew all the stuff. And I was terrified. I was like, oh no, like, no, but you should make it. Don't ignore all that stuff you listened to. It's not important anymore. So it was very strange.
To take a moment to appreciate how ridiculously wholesome that is.
Yeah.
So, Just like, oh, my heart.
I died. I like got teared up. Like I had to be like, you guys don't even know. The kids were really cute about it. They were like, we love the show. I was like, but like, yeah, it's kids playing games, man. I don't know. That's the thing. Like, I try really hard not to write elaborate backgrounds. Like I actually fight the urge to like detail out all the stuffs, because I really my whole thing in telling games is this is a story that belongs to all of us, right? Mm-hmm. This is the story we tell together. So kids get to make multiple characters if they want. They have, they get to design who their family looks like, and like who's that one kid you hate at school, and who's that one kid you want to be besties with, and who's the teacher everybody can't stand, and and they'll create lore, and then that lore, we talk a lot about this in the game. I always say the whole point of this is learning how to weave the threads. You guys are all going to create different threads, and then we're going to figure out what the intersection points are. So like the last game, a whole bunch of the kids, like, because they read each other's stories and they get nerdy about it. So a whole bunch of the kids were like, oh, I'm the special once in every 100,000 years blood spherix, and another kid's like, oh, I have special blood too. That's why I can connect with this ancient artifact that has the power of a god. And another kid's like, well, my blood's special. And of course, I was like, oh, you kids, you made it easy for me. So at the end, they were, they ended up having somebody stole a sample of their blood, and they were using all those samples to try to violate the compact. And, it was so great, because when they finally learned what was happening, they were like, oh, they got our blood, and it just, it hit. But those points are so much harder to, it's a different approach to like not force those by having the plans already laid, and allow the kids to create these really crazy all over the place stories, and then figure out where the intersections are and encourage them to find those. So it's a very, I don't know, it's an oddball way to both run games and create lore on the fly.
I can see that. I do. My own style of GMing is very improv. Play off what the players are talking about, what their characters are doing, their backgrounds, but a lot of it, I don't actually decide ahead of time what's going to happen. I use what they give me, and then they have fun, I have fun, and building off of other people's imaginations is what I think it really makes role-playing games great.
Oh yeah, and that's like, when I was writing Build the Void, that was like my biggest thing to put in there, was like, this is a collective story. It's not a them versus us, player versus GM. This is everybody working together. And when I run my universe in particular, one of my friends, I compared notes, and he has like 5 pages of just the introduction. And then me, I have, okay, so the starting point, there's a there's a tavern somewhere. Okay, and then midway through the game, they'll probably run into a god, and then the end, we'll see what the players decide. So like, they look at mine and they're like, how do you run a good campaign? Like, they're like, I love your campaigns, but how do you do this? I'm like, I don't know. I listen to what you guys say, and then I go, there we go. That sounds like fun. Let's do that. Oh, there's a god of mowing lawns now. I don't know how that happened, but there we go.
In space, what does that mean? What is a space lawn?
Well, see, I love to treat space like this is completely different, but I like to treat space as one large continent, and then planets are each individual cities. And so it's fun the way my players go around and see how things can connect and interact with one another, but be so different at the same time. So like a lot of the main space that's been explored has been explored, and then they have a lot of understanding of how stuff works. I like sci-fi settings that make sense but also don't at the same time, so it's fun to kind of set those.
I play
up.
Science fantasy. I don't know about fiction.
That's what. That's why I avoid
weird
science
stuff
fantasy.
is weird. It's high tech. It's mad. It doesn't matter what you call it. It just works.
I say sci-fi is weird.
Yeah, it is. It's fun. I like the
wibbly wobbly, timey wimey stuff.
Exactly.
We are about halfway through. Why don't we take a real quick break? Give everyone a chance for their bio needs. We'll be back in somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. Hopefully not as many as 10. And stay around while I run the screens of the cool and interesting TTRPG products that are being kickstarted as we speak.
Ooh.
See you in a few, everybody. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We're all back and ready to go. I am going to start with there was a chat question earlier, and I want to make sure that I don't miss it.
Ooh.
What do you find most challenging about developing a Pantheon?
Challenging.
I think
Getting the players.
it's the overlap. Oh no, you go for it, Natalie.
I think getting the players to care, because if you're doing world building, you want the players to interact with it a little bit. Sometimes you're gonna write something, and you're gonna set out the bait, the trap that the players will fall into to interact with the thing you've written, and they will just not take it at all. So writing something that is engaging and in depth enough to, be something worth writing, and also simple and juicy enough for the players to latch onto it. That's a very tough line to walk, in my experience.
I think
that
having a place for. Oh, sorry. I think having a place for what you're creating, making a god of something, and then. Well, what if they just aren't that great? Who's going to worship them?
Skald, what were you going to say?
I was saying, I think the overlap is the tricky spot because at the same time where it's really fun to have a lot of major and minor deities, sometimes there's that not so clear line about where deities' domains start to overlap so much that you may as well just have one instead of two, because there's often at least a little bit of overlap. And so the question is, how many deities do you want in your world? Do you want them all to be deities, or do you want to have deities and demigods, and avatars? How complex are we getting here? So I think trying to keep it, because it's so fun to be creative with it, and it's so fun to just let it run and do its thing, trying to rein it in and keep it so that it is not so overwhelming that your players' eyes just kind of glaze over. You want that nice balance of enough selection so that it feels realistic, it feels like it fits the world, it gives them something to engage with, but it's not so much that it's just like information overload.
Yeah, I don't know.
If
I
your
feel
players
like
have to ask every session, you've done it wrong.
Yeah. Well, but I think that's actually a good measurement of when you're doing it right too, is when your players ask for more. Like, I think the key for me is just that collaboration
it's how they're
element.
asking.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's the collaboration element. For me, I'm not going to write lore until I know my players want that lore. It's when I'm like, ooh, I had an idea. They'll say something and I'll be like, I had an idea for a thing. Can I write it? Do you want this? And they'll be like, yes. And I'll be like, okay, great. And I'll run with it. But I think that's key. I think a lot of folks come to, I don't know. I find that like in D&D circles, I see a lot of folks who imagine world building and, Pantheon creation or continents or cultures to be this sort of monolithic, difficult, almost authorial thing. And I think there's a lot of folks who come to running games in this weird sort of auteur mindset where they're like, yes, I have to have this incredibly complex plot and millions of characters and an entire world. And it's like, no. Go in with a general feeling of like, yeah, we're going to have a swashbuckling epic on the high seas with the monsters, and then just see what your players want to do. And then work with them to build that world. Like if they want to go to the Isle of Monsters, then you can make an Isle of Monsters. But if they don't make an Isle of Monsters unless that's something you want to do with your spare time. Like don't force it down their throats.
Lay the tracks in front of them. It will save you so much work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the most difficult I've had is making gods that aren't overpowered, because I don't want something that the players are just going to constantly rely on to like, why do this now that this has happened a few times in a row because of how our dice have discerned. I like making gods that can help in small, minor ways without taking away from the player's achievement. So I think the biggest thing when I was designing let's see, we have 20 major gods, and then we have dragons and phoenixes that represent the arcane realm and all that fun stuff. But the biggest thing was to make them not all powerful creatures that take away from players of power as well. That was always my biggest thing, because I'm all about the player. in designing. I like seeing what the players do because that's what gets them most excited.
Mhm.
So whenever I designed my universe, I was like, okay, I want gods to be a fun thing that several players who really like running into religious stuff can totally dive into and have fun with it, but not so broken that it's just the Deus ex machina for every situation. Oh, we're all about to die.
Yeah,
I want a
why
player
should the
to die.
players
Just
do
run
anything?
to.
I mean, if you got the gods.
Yeah. Right. And so I tried to avoid that. And I think that's like the biggest challenge whenever I come up with a new Pantheon, person or selection, is to just keep them in balance and not keeping overlaps, like Skald said, not letting things overlap with one another and not being too overpowered. And I think that's a big struggle with, like, when you see some of the like gods of like Greek and Egyptian and mythology. They're like, man, okay, so they could just this is a huge thing that was created. Oh dear. I don't know if I so that's what I always try to avoid, is the overpowered aspect of it, so that it becomes the one solution.
Yeah, I like to have mine very powerful, but bored, and they don't want to do it themselves. They'd rather see how it plays out when the mortals handle things.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they help out by providing some magic or some advice or throwing in some barriers just to make things more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But the gods have been around for ever, or at least a couple thousand years for a new world, if that's your type of world. If it doesn't have that much history, if the gods created the world and they were there, then it might be a 6,000-year history. But they might just be bored and not want to do it themselves.
Lawrence Grabowski asked a great question in an article he wrote for Medium, and I'll drop the link in here. And I think it's a very pertinent question to development of pantheons. It said, do the deities in your setting add interesting, actionable complications to your cultures? And if so, examples.
I was going to say, I think it can be reflexive. Because in the same way that the deities, I think, in normal human society here, I think it's very much that deities are impacted by culture. Religion is impacted by culture. And so I think it can kind of work both ways. I know that one of the ways that, for example, like, this gets way too deep in the weeds, which is part of why I don't try to flush it out too much with pantheons, but when making a lot of pantheons, if it's going to show up in an AQH setting, there's going to be queer deities. And so one of the things to remember is that deities aren't just associated with, so let's say you have a sun deity. Let's say you have the deity of warfare. If you make that deity female, what are the cultural implications? Is that saying that warfare is women's domain? If so, how does that change gender roles in the culture and in the society? So much of what is in the deities and what goes into building them reflects back on the culture and vice versa. So I think it's kind of a chicken and egg scenario where it's not like one exclusively controls the other, which is tricky because it means that when you're building a pantheon, you have these like continual spirals of repercussions that if you want to get really deep into it, you can, but there's always going to be that sort of cause and effect interplay between the two, where just like gender is just one example, because that's such a big thing in a lot of culture as far as what cultural roles there are for different people, so it's complicated.
Well, it's funny too, because I mean, even the concept of a deity, I'm like, belief is just another aspect of culture, y'all. Like it's all culture. Like, you're really talking about what are people's values, what do they believe in, and when we talk about it in game terms, I think very quickly a lot of people think about like, well, what is their specific? These are actual forces that can reach into the world and do stuff, right? And like mess with things, as opposed to motivating beliefs and ethos and concepts that people organize their lives and systems of belief around, right? But like I don't know. I think it's huge to think about. Like, every single culture that you create, if you're making it, like, I think about cultures the same way I think about characters in my game. I always tell kids, like, really most characters in Stories RPG come down to a few lines of story: a drive, a downfall, a bond, a trait, and a quirk. And I'm like, I like to start with quirks. Like, tell me something weird about that character or deity or whatever it is. Tell me the weird thing first that sticks in your brain that makes you remember them later. Like they're always popping their gum, or they seem to lick every new thing that they encounter. And I can build everything else once I get the weird. Like, just give me the weird. Because if you start with the weird, the rest of it'll, like, you'll figure it out. Like, everybody will be like, oh, God. And then you either play into it or against it, and it comes from there, right? But then
I laugh
imagining
because I
this
have a PC
style-
who licks things
Oh,
in
gosh.
my game.
Do we all? I do too. I don't know where it comes from.
That was not I don't know. That just came out of my head. I've never had anybody do that. But
I'm
yeah.
totally missing out, obviously. I haven't gotten that yet.
Well, my favorite.
What am I doing wrong?
That player, he plays one of the lizard species that we have,
Oh.
and the lizard species has a book of food, and so he tastes everything and licks it, and then puts it in his book of food or not food. So he licked our nuclear bomb the other day, and thankfully he did not hit the button. But it's funny you mentioned that. It's just, where does these things even come from?
Perfect.
I lick everything.
We're drinking the same weird game air, apparently. Yeah.
Oh
That's,
yeah, oh yeah. Wait till you look more into Veilvoid. It's weird. There's weird, like some of the stuff people make. I'm like, I love you. How did you make a unicorn that carries around bits and bobs in their endless, briefcase they carry with them?
Oh gosh, sorry. I love character design. Like I had a unicorn. One of my kids played a unicorn who had spectral hands, and she was famous for slapping people with her spectral hands. Like she was just a unicorn, but she had these hands that kind of floated around her. And, everybody was always kind of like sidling a little bit to one side or the other because they knew. But yeah. I like starting with the weird. It's true.
And then working
Weird
that
is
into your
memorable.
gods, too.
Yeah.
Like, since Pantheons is the thing, weird, they're weird.
Well, I was thinking about your power thing earlier, Trevor, because I actually have the reverse instinct. It's not that I don't want to make gods powerful. It's that I want my players to have all the power. Because I find that to be a lot more dramatic than not giving them any. Because then they have to deal with the consequences of everything they do. So I think about a game that I run for a lot of kids called Mecha Magi, which is just really my science fantasy answer to the question, why would you have giant robots with tiny skinny legs? And the answer was, has to be magic, because physics-wise it just doesn't work. Those ankles would snap under the weight of sure, you can fly around in space that way, but you'd just be better off in just a globe. Like, why would you do that? So yeah, they have these ancient artifacts that they can connect with that are dormant until you connect. And you have to kind of negotiate with the consciousness, which is immortal within. And if you can bond with it, then you can carry it around as like a fashion accoutrement and it'll turn into a giant mecha when you want it to. But we always say that they give you the ability to create, absorb, and alter energy and mass almost infinitely. But it depends on how well you master it. And so it has immense abilities, and you can create all these kinds of effects once you shape your giant, your mecha. But the question then becomes like, okay, so how do you make sure that nobody gets in a fight? And there's always lore about the last Arc War, because Arc is Arcane Reactor Core. That's what they call these things. So the last Arc War is what keeps everybody, So now when they give you your Arc, they're like, okay, look, swear the oath. Okay, swear the oath in front of this guy who has magic powers that make it so that if you break the oath, bad things happen. Because, you gotta worry. Once you can create life and shape mass and regenerate stars. Like some of our missions, they've been like, yeah, terraform this world and then bring all the people from this planet with a dying star over, or reignite the star. I love starting with things like that. Go big.
Oh well, I love going big. When I was talking about power, I just don't like too much of I've just had players in the past that have like relied purely on the gods and don't want to go into their own creativity with it, and I'm like, so I have a balancing act. And I also prefer to actually use passive effects, because all the gods in our universe, the closer the player actively engages with the god and the more they engage with the god, they actually gain passive effects and even artifacts that can assist them with it. So that's more how I like to use the gods, I guess, is watching how they interact with that, if that makes sense.
have you had in or created in any of your systems or games combinations where some groups are monotheistic, they worship one god, some are pantheistic, and did you create benefits derived from one or the other?
Mechanical
Well,
benefits?
I would have
or-
personally, like, for me, that's something that as far as the benefits to one versus the other, that's something that I probably wouldn't put in my game, because I think that there's so much conflict between religion and our real world situation that I think in the games it would be whether you are a follower of Pantheon or whether you are a follower of a single deity, you either no one gets benefits or everyone gets benefits, because I think putting a favoritism towards one or the other of those systems could potentially be offensive to players or GMs. So I think that it would be an all or nothing. One of the extra recent challenges that has been interesting in one of the latest projects that I'm writing for one of our pieces that's years out, but I'm trying to get some of the writing done, is having a setting that is spiritual, but there are no deities. So it's very much, and this is more of an experiment than anything else, where it's like, yeah, so it's like it's an animistic, at least in this setting, it's kind of an animistic environment. There are such things as spirits, ghosts, specters. There are things you can piss off if you're not respectful. But there's also a sense that if you don't respect, the wilds, the waters, the trees, that luck might not be on your side. And so there aren't necessarily physical manifestations, there aren't deities, but there is this sense that everything has an essence to it, almost like a soul, and that plays into the world a little bit, which has been really interesting to mess around with, for sure. But as far as the monotheism versus polytheism, I think I at least in writing try to keep it even across the board, because I know that for players can be a very intense issue, and I don't want to exacerbate any of those conflicts necessarily.
Great answer.
Yeah,
I tend to go.
sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, you
No,
start.
no. You go ahead.
It's okay. I tend to go polytheistic only because I do D&D and the gods make themselves known. There's more than one of them, definitely. I've got 20. So a monotheistic just wouldn't make logical sense in that kind of world. Trevor?
Yeah, I do a weird combination of the two depending on the campaign. So all the base gods of the universe, so there's a polytheistic thing in and of life, death, all that good stuff. But then all the gods understand that there's one god above them who's a monotheistic. So like it's super funny because the normal gods that the mortals see as gods are like, no, we follow a monotheistic one. We're just mortals like you guys. But then all the people in the earth and in their central realm are like, oh no, we're polytheistic. There's all these different gods and we must worship them all. And I like the idea of like all the gods are like, no, we don't need worship or anything like that. And then when they do get the worship, they're like, this is kind of weird. I mean, I can help you because you're asking, or harm you, whatever we want. But then I had another setting where there was, on the same planet, there was a group that was polytheistic and one that was monotheistic, and they were both worshiping the same god, change. And the best thing is they didn't really argue with one another because it's change. So they were like, she has multiple personalities. So the monotheistic side was like, oh yeah, she's multiple people in one concept. That's fine. And then the polytheistic was like, yeah, she's one person, so that's fine too. I don't like Skald said, I don't like bringing in like conflict because we deal with that enough in real life with all that kind of stuff. But I like when you have gods that have multiple personalities, it's fun to have a polytheistic and monotheistic at the same time. That was a weird experience, but it's fun.
In the setting I'm currently spending the most time writing, gods are a very like culty kind of look at it. It's not. It's the worship is messy and it's poorly understood, and it's something desperate people do. They go down to the depths of these huge oil rigs, and they start like trying to speak to the things in the ocean.
Dude, that's so cool. Sorry, I had to just be like, oh, that's so good.
Thank you.
That is fun.
It goes between monotheistic and polytheistic because someone might go down there and they might start looking for something, and they'll find one thing, and they're like, "Oh, this is the meaning of the universe," or 100 things will try to speak to them, and they'll go insane, but they'll worship all of those 100 things.
Very Lovecraftian.
Yeah, that just
the
totally
giant
feeds
manatees in it.
to like a horror setting, you know.
Oh, yeah.
It kind of reminds
So
me
good.
even of Old Gods of Appalachia that was just kickstarted by Monty Cook Games, where the gods are these mountain deities in the, you know, in Appalachia, and
Yeah.
whether they're deities or not is a question, but people offer sacrifices out of fear and or reverence. You know, there's something very interesting. I mean, to me, all of what you were just saying just feeds into this very heavy modern horror kind of thing. They just, as a
I
DM,
can't write a setting without it becoming horror.
That's
yeah,
fair.
but as a DM, it's just too
always-
juicy to leave alone if someone's doing that. Or a GM.
Yeah. I blame the Magnus Archives. It permanently changed my entire perception of media. It's just
So, in all this, what would be the result for non-believers in a world with real gods? Or are there any results?
Same thing. I try to avoid consequences, because I feel like that can get into the whole, you know, punishing non-believers type scenario. And for non-believers, I don't exclude them from the realm of the gods. So if, for example, there are deities in the world who do have powers who can influence certain things, they wouldn't necessarily be opposed to interacting with non-believers, because non-believers are still part of the world. Whether or not the person chooses to believe in them, that is entirely up to them. But I've had characters who will interact with a deity and or somehow be given a boon in some instance or something and still remain non-believers. And, you know, be like, did that it? Nah. You know, meanwhile, the cleric's like, what? So I think leaving it open to the... Yeah, I was going to say, leaving it open to the players to do whatever. And if there are situations where a deity is being interacted with, including even the non-believer players in that, and whether or not they choose to believe, it's entirely up to them.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't know how we haven't mentioned Terry Pratchett up until now, but like I love the Terry Pratchett take where like, you know, they're in the sort of Greek-ish spot and somebody's like, yeah, we don't believe in gods anymore, and you know, a lightning bolt will hit right next to them and they're like, well, you know, except for, you know, like it's like conditional, like the whole concept of what a god, you know, what's a god, right? And it's like in these games, it's really just shorthand for there's this really intensely powerful thing that can mess with stuff, and you don't have to believe it's a god. You know, non-believers can walk around and be like, yeah, whatever. I'm coming for you. Like, if I'm big enough, I'm gonna be you someday. But like, they don't have to be like, yeah, okay, you can think they're, you know, all that in a bag of chips. You can kiss their butt for power. I won't. Because, which I love. I like that sort of, I don't know, like recognizing that in a fantasy world, it becomes this other thing. It's not like belief in the real world. In many ways, it's like, you're not going to get into religious conflicts because, you know, you can really duke it out. You can be like, well, our God's bigger than your God. It's like, all right, well, fine. Let's all stand on the sidelines. Go Thor, you know, like, and just let them duke it out because they're real and they can do that, you know?
Well, yeah, a player that chooses to gain or lose belief could make a great storyline for their character. You know, it's, you know, it can be a beautiful one. It can be a tragic one. You know, it can go down lots of roads. As a GM, I don't think I wouldn't choose to run that on them, but if they wanted to do that and explore that, I'd be open to it as long as the rest of the player, if the other players were willing to go along and let it happen one way or another. I mean, that's what Session Zero is about. You want to talk about it. Have Session Zero midway through your campaign, early to start, you know.
So wait, Session Zero. Let me
folks.
Let me wait. I want to ask if y'all want to do something. Can we make a Pantheon right now? Because that's kind of what I want to do.
I'm a
I mean, I'm just asking because I was like, we've been talking about this, and I'm like, I just got nerdy and I was like, can we do a thing where we make a thing? Like, let's make
Oh,
a thing.
I homebrew stuff on the fly all the time when I'm on like podcasts. I'm like, hey, give me some words and I'll make something up. This is perfect.
Okay, so first question, context, and I don't know, anybody can answer, but like we should probably take turns. What's our setting? Are we gonna go like far future, like some kind of like let's start with like era, and then we can refine and get some gods going. Is that cool? Does that work? I don't know. Y'all can just be like, no, dude, let's roll. And I'd be totally fine.
good.
I just got nerdy about it. I kind of wanted to do sci-fi because you mentioned it earlier, Natalie, and I was like,
Let's do
I
sci-fi.
still want to make some
I wanted
sci-fi.
to say it, but I didn't want to.
That actually
No,
sounds
but-
more challenging, yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
go. Okay. Sci-fi deities. Do y'all want to go by planets, by forces, by cultures, by species? What do you want to do?
Random?
Okay. Do you want to roll it? I'm looking for dice now.
I mean, in the span
That's
of the universe, a planet would be a pretty minor deity, I would think, if you're building your
Well,
domains.
that depends
based
if
on
you've got
the
people.
size and
that
gravity of-
depends if you've got people in
Yeah,
everywhere,
right.
or if you've just got people in like the Milky Way.
Influence of people,
Our solar
right? Like,
system.
okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to give here. Somebody's got to roll this. Let's do 1 is forces. 2 is species. 3 is, what do we want to say, culture? Like planetary culture? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think culture's the most interesting one there.
Well, then pick it. We don't have to roll if we're going to pick. Do we want to say everybody gets to be like create one culture and one like one
Deity bound to that
deity,
Let's do
culture.
one deity
One-
of that culture?
One culture.
That's fun.
Pick a planet.
One planet, one culture, one
Yeah, pick a
species, one
planet
deity.
so that we can at least contain it a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm
Considering
gonna-
how much time we have remaining.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Pick your planet. I'm gonna do. Let's see. I'm gonna do a little like planetary thing. There, roll a d4. Cold, hot, underwater, or gas.
Nope.
Everyone roll.
You can roll. You can roll, or you can pick.
I gotta grab.
Think of your environment of your planet.
I was gonna say if we've already got one, should we just hang?
Just do it. Just do it. Don't even ask. Yeah, this is for helping anybody who's not already got a thing. Like, if you got a thing, do the thing.
I got you. Well, people
Okay,
are
okay.
figuring out their thing. I'll do my thing.
No, I got it.
Okay.
I was
so
gonna grab a dice.
for planet, I actually went with essentially a movable space station. This culture is nomadic.
fun.
They're
Yes.
defined
Awesome.
by the fact that they don't actually have a home planet. So they're drifters and they never settle in any one place. They're
That's fun.
actually a mix of species over time, because they were essentially sort of collected community, and then over time they have adapted certain traits that actually make all of these different species a little more like each other because they've adapted to better be in lower gravity and in lower oxygen environments. So they're not 100% like the initial species that they came from, but they're also still a little bit of a mix. But they have certain traits that make them similar. The deity that I came up with presides over all forms of travel. So this deity is not omnipotent, but they are omnipresent. They are in all places at once. And as such, they preside over the realms of travel, getting from point A to point B. So anytime before you make a jump, anytime before you travel, you might placate this deity. They are genderless, because they are omnipresent. And the forms that they can take certain physical forms, but because there's a multitude of species here, the form that they're most often depicted in is a kind of amorphous nebula shape, like if you guys have ever seen the Crab Nebula.
Yeah.
So a collection of stars and gases that doesn't look like any one of the specific species on the station, and therefore is kind of equally worshipped by all of them. So that's mine.
That's
I love
fun.
it.
I like that.
That's sick.
What?
Go
I'm
on.
sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. The one I had in mind immediately once we came up with this little plan here was I was thinking of a small moon-sized planet that was actually crafted by a species of techno-organic creatures to the point where they built this planet completely from mechanized creation. So it's a full-on planet that runs with like a nuclear core and everything. And what I was thinking is, as they're producing this planet, interlinking a lot of their own minds with a lot of how this planet creates in order to like better control and work with one another, a god in the machine kind of appeared from the collective consciousness. And so from this collective consciousness, this artificial intelligence god in the machine creature sprouted. And so they began to worship this creature as it controls a huge portion of technology and has that way in understanding that even the techno-organics didn't, because they combined this living form of their consciousness with machine learning to create this new thing, accidentally, of course. And then I also had the idea of a fun little thing of their clerics, their worshippers being programmers. Because what better form of worshiping in a machine, all-powerful AI god than to be the one that speaks and programs with it?
Yeah, you speak the language of the gods.
The language of the divine.
You create with your words. Yeah, there you go. It's the golem, right? Yeah.
I like something that Skald had said that I think would lend itself to a very interesting god. The idea of people becoming an amalgamation, the process, almost like marriage and fertility is here. I like the idea of the bringing in or the amalgamation of different people into one place being a process that is a worshipped process. You respect it like relationships, except it is the relationship of everybody being brought together. I think there's some like kind of a beautiful we're all connected kind of feeling and belief, because if you're going to bring almost anybody into your people, you have to have kind of a certain respect and reverence for even people you've never met.
Yep.
Like, because they're potentially part of you when you bring them in. I think that would be a very interesting god. I don't know what they would look like. I think they would look like the perfect mix of everyone.
Or maybe they would always be shifting and have pieces and parts of, like every depiction would be, like piecemeal almost, like the patchwork god.
That'd be cool.
Or it could even be where someone's perspective changes what it looks like. So two people could be looking at the god and see something completely different that relates to them, but that they know is the same.
Oh, you know what? Those believers would be great diplomats. They'd be the ones who like... They would, they'd learn every species, like every language. They'd learn every culture. They'd learn how to fluently, because it's all part of who I am, and maybe that's like part of their, part of the what they get from their worship is that ability to sort of exist in between, right? To be in between all peoples. Mm-hmm. I was feeling goblin-y. I was like, I want a people whose planet got destroyed by a dying sun that turned into a black hole, and they worship entropy, and they're now sort of a belief system throughout the universe. They're called the Breakers, and they believe that we are surfing on the edge of the collapse. We're pushing endlessly as a universe towards ultimate entropy. And the collapse will all go back to this. The only reason I wanted to riff off this, Scott, was I was like, oh, I had a unity myth that happened in my head too. And the unity was, when everything's broken, when it all collapses, it'll all go back to being one thing again. And we'll all just be, back in that single point. It sounds a little bit
like a unity death cult.
Well, I was trying to imagine, I'm like, I don't want them to be a death cult. I was like, I actually imagine them being the ultimate like junkyard specialists. They can take anything apart, and they know the weak points of anything. And real zealots may even be committed to never ever fixing anything. Like, we're never gonna fix it. We're never gonna build a thing, but we'll break it for you. And like, so they can work in all these very interesting roles, right? Like, you got a giant spaceship that you need to dismantle? Hire a crew of breakers. You want to completely strip a floating Hulk in space? Hire the breakers. You want to sabotage somebody's operation? smuggle some breakers into their compound. Those guys can take anything apart. So yeah, I was imagining them as being a sort of larger than a single people or a single planet, but born of a single planet experience, and sort of like being animated by that understanding. And that god entropy would be, always represented by an emptiness or a void or a hole, right?
Yeah.
And also like, the idea of like always, I imagine that the acolytes would all have like items that would allow them to kind of see the weak points. And that's what they're interested in, is where does reality have its weak points?
That's very cool.
And if you're a really bad engineer, you're going to fit in perfectly.
Yeah. No, you have to be a really good engineer because you can break it all. I would imagine that the worst of them, like the highest members, would be like former engineers who like some massive project fell apart and like, they just couldn't rely on it. And it was like, yeah, okay, I can see the influence of entropy. Like, I need to start taking things apart. I got to stop building. I'm fighting against the tide instead of riding on it.
Well, I'm gonna go with one that's not doesn't immediately seem quite so sci-fi-ish, but kind of a water seeker, because the source of all life that we know of relies on water. Even creatures that don't live in the water, they need to drink water, they need to consume things that have water in them. We look for signs of water as signs of life or potential life across the universe, and so they'd be water seekers, and that would be their deity. It would be just the idea of water itself. Water is life. Go to Europa, there's probably something alive down in the oceans down there. It's covered with frozen water. Even machine creatures would have water influence because you need it for hydraulics, you need it for metal plating. So it's a common connection between everyone. And so I think even in like a futuristic space-based society, water would be central, and it might form a basis for motivations, for beliefs. If it can be personified as bringing life, a sign of life, even when it's destructive, like, hurricanes and stuff, it spawns life because it's more, it changes things.
It's the most important of the elemental gods in the Pantheon, at least currently.
So,
Well, I feel like you just defined something about our universe, which is kind of cool. Like before this, maybe we had like crystalline beings running around, non-water-based organisms. But you were like, no, water is the life. And now it's like, okay, now it's canon. All beings connect.
You need a liquid to form crystals, generally.
But it could have been like, liquid, hydrogen or something crazy. But no.
It could be water.
It's water now. It's water now.
Or it could be water as the interpretation of liquid in general.
No, I like it as canon. This is why it's fun to do this, because like you just created a thoroughfare. Like you just decided, and it's cool because you created that deity, and now we've got, a connection. All life is based on water, which means now we can like explore all the ramifications of that, right? Like finding water, seeking water, terraforming, like creating life, maintaining life. All of it centers around maintaining water.
Yeah,
it's
water
very
systems
ice
and
pirates.
Spaceships, water systems that are so valuable in rare parts of the galaxy that they're protected like they're Fort Knox.
All right.
Mind them asteroids. Let's go.
So Nathan and Michael, either we're on the same wavelength or I'm a complete hack, because one, I was thinking of water deity, and two, you've just said ice pirates mining asteroids.
Ice
That was my whole
pirates!
idea.
Let's go!
Just like this god of commerce and trade that is represented through water. There's this civilization that is living on like a planet with rings, or like something Saturn-like, and they're going out there, they're mining the ice, and it's kind of like a Poseidon type situation where whenever they'd go out on a trip, they do some blessings or some rituals before. They're like, oh, like we pray to this god, and then it the trip goes well, and our ship doesn't get wrecked by an asteroid or That's what I got.
Yeah.
I
Well,
like
if,
it.
if you do end up crash, then clearly somebody wasn't praying hard enough.
I like the idea of
Yeah.
a digger,
Yeah.
like a digger god, like an ice god, like a digger god who's like, all the precious things are hidden, So like we pray, like because when you go down into a mine in an asteroid, I imagine that's like. Sorry, I have a whole game about asteroid mining, so I'm obsessed with this. Like, it's called Hold Fast Station, and you play like a community of asteroid miners who are marooned in space, and it's all about how you like hold together and like try to keep the community from dying in space. So I think there's so much like I don't know. It's cool when you were like, yeah, when they go out. I mean, there's a place where you need somebody to pray to. You're like, yeah, we're about to go dig in an asteroid mine in the void, like. You want somebody to say please to, like, even if they're not listening, you just want the ritual of saying it.
You can even
Now it makes me wonder. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go on, Trevor.
I was just wondering, is ice becomes like a relic, a holy relic then, to where it's like this is life into the part where we can actually now grasp it in front of us. So I was just wondering, is like, does ice then become something even more important than just ice as well? And then the miners coming in and gathering this holy relic, and that could lead to conflict where there's a group of people who don't want you to mine this ice because it is part of the god.
Ooh.
So
You could build really interesting symbolism around it, not as miners, but more like hearts and veins, like the veins of rock through minerals, and the heart of the innermost part that's the most valuable, which is usually going to be the densest. Instead of it being mines and stuff, kind of go a little more esoteric and metaphoric with them being looking at it as hearts and veins of things.
Well, that's like
inanimate
Ymir.
stuff.
That's totally a Ymir, the frost god, like dead body of a god. Like maybe it's like, we are those who are chosen to find the body of he who gave life to the universe, and like, you guys didn't say the right prayer before you went into that mine. Give me that ice. Like get off of it. You're befouling it. I don't know. I could see all sorts of like cool. I don't know. That's like a million stories right there.
I like this interconnected universe we just.
We're all on the same page that these are space dwarves, right?
Oh, I mean, they're called stunts in this universe, but yes.
I like,
No,
'cause
Games Workshop.
The breakers are gobos. The ice pirate miners are dwarves. We've got a nice sort of changeling amalgam people who are running around. And I don't know. This is I play in this world. Like, I'm ready, guys. Let's make some characters. Let's go.
Oh my God, the amalgam people, they're spies because they can be anybody. Not just political. Maybe they travel around and they take offerings for collecting information because they know all the languages from the amalgamation of so many people. They know, and they take people in that need to leave wherever they're at.
I want to know how the amalgam and the travelers get along, because I feel like there's some cool overlap there, but like also potentially tension. I don't know, because like they definitely travel, and also we are, all people are one and should be one. They kind of connect.
I also feel like the space pirates would also be very related with the god of transportation that we have here. Like, okay, what gets approved and what doesn't by standards? I like thinking of conflict. So.
The clerics or religious leadership of the transportation gods, that they are creating and secreting away the newest types of engines and machines for getting people around, or they're making sure people find them to improve travel. They might have a lot of, maybe the priests are engineers and stuff. Who knows?
What would you call? So I had like the traveler, we have like unity or the amalgam. We have like the breakers, We have, I don't know what we're going to call the water god. And I feel like the digger, it's not like the digger. We need something like, what's the word for like a grave digger? Like there's
How
some
about the
word for like people.
Heartstones? The Heartstone. No.
I don't know. I'm looking for something that has that sense of like we are bringing forth the body of a god. I don't know. There's like a whole thing here. I like it a lot.
You could do like the diggers, the seekers, the oh gosh, what's the thing called that you have the lich's soul in the reliquary?
Phylactery.
Phylactery. Yeah, like phylactery. I don't know.
Or like
That's
those who collect.
What about like the untumors instead of intumors? It's like the untumors. I don't know. My brain.
Yeah.
Oh, undertakers. That was the word you were looking for.
The Undertakers.
The Undertakers.
Oh man.
Now I'm just thinking of the WWE stuff.
Right? I was the Undertaker.
Well, then you got the pirates that come and steal your air.
Oh. Yeah, I don't know. But does everybody need air? Because everybody may need water. But some of those people out there are like, don't steal my methane.
That's why I went with water, because like you got stuff, things that breathe air, but also things that breathe water. Probably more common.
I like it. Yo, we got to make this game now.
I'm inspired. The gears are turning.
It's good.
We are actually getting to the end, and I want to make sure I want to respect your time and give you a chance to say who all of you are again. Why don't we go in reverse order this time and start with Nathan? You can let people know where they can find you, who you are, all that stuff.
Sure, I'm Nathan. I go by the Amethyst Dragon online. I've made D&D stuff for decades. You can find me, all my stuff, at www.amethyst-dragon.com. Well over 1,000 things there. I make lots of stuff. I make stuff constantly. Writing a book eventually for next year. Wrote a book of quotes. Actually, my players' quotes, and I just threw them all in a book, and you can get that if you want. 50 pages of totally no context quotes.
That sounds like fun.
And on Twitter, it's at Amethyst Dragon, because there weren't enough characters to put the at the beginning of it.
Yeah, your webpage is full of content. It is an overwhelmingly high quality amount of content. There's so much stuff.
Yeah, if you want anything for D&D,
yeah,
I'd make it up, and I take anything as inspiration: pop culture, idioms, conversations with other creators. So that's me.
All right.
Right on.
Natalie.
I'm Natalie, Mutagenic Games on Twitter, and all the links are in the Twitter. That's the place to go to get to anything else. I do. I'm starting doing one-page RPGs every month, or roughly one page. Sometimes they get way more than that, but you'll get an RPG a month. So
one page and more.
That's fun.
Michael.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'll put all my things. I'm League of Legends. Yep, and I also have a bio.link/Michael Lowe. Thank you, Scott, for putting that in there. So you can find. I have an itch page as well. You can find all of a whole bunch of games. Stories RPG is actually modular. You can get the base one-page game for free, and then there's all these different boosts you can buy. And there are the full adventure arcs, and there's the podcast, and yeah, come check us out. It's really fun. I do this for a living, and it's loads of fun. Everybody here will attest. You too can do this. It's amazing.
Yes. All right, Trever.
So I'm Trever. I'm the author and creator of the sci-fi fantasy storytellers TTRPG Veil of the Void. You can learn more from us over on our Twitter at publisherssdg. And then, of course, our Linktree, which is what I always recommend people to, due to its really nice organization, is linktr.ee/Veil of the Void. Gets you everything you need on there, including where you can find copies of the demo book if you want to try it out before you buy. We even have a sale going on right now for $5 off the PDF and the book. So good time to look at that. But yeah, that's where you can find us.
Yeah, you have the nicest, most organized link tree I've seen. And the link
Thank
is
you.
in there already.
I'm all about organization. Like, especially if you
beautiful.
look into Veil of the Void, trust me, I hate disorganization. So you'll see.
I was so surprised when I saw the link tree. I'm like, wow, I didn't know you could do this with Linktree. And it was beautiful.
Right? It's so cool.
All right, Skald.
I'm Skald at Skald of Shenanigans on Twitter. I'm not super huge on social media, so another great way to find me is through AQH. We have a link tree as well. AQH Discord for Awfully Queer Heroes. That's at Awfully Q Heroes because word limits on Twitter. Letter limits, rather. And yeah, I make free content on my own Ko-fi page for folks, but I spend most of my time doing formatting, writing, layout, all that kind of stuff for the projects through AQH, which we mostly do on Kickstarter. But come say hi. We love interacting with people, so don't be shy. Come say hi. Join the Discord. Geek out with us. All that good stuff.
Their stuff's amazing.
I am Scott, and I'm one half of Zealzaddy. We put out 5e product, soon Cypher product. I do this show, and we do actual plays. We're changing format. I just finished a 3-year D&D campaign. And we're going to now go to mini campaigns to try different systems. The first one up right now is Kids on Brooms, starting on Wednesday. And then we're going to play right after that Invisible Sun. And then I have all these cool Kickstarters behind me that I'm going to put to use finally and play some things that I've spent money on. So...
yay, playing indie games.
Yeah,
yes.
You got to do it. Please back indie creators. It's very hard to make a living doing this. I'm really proud of Michael for finding a way to do it. I hope everyone here finds a way to do it. Story Talk does have episodes where we talk about the business of being a creator and a publisher. So watch for those. We also do ones on how to be a better player, improving, or even how to become a player that gets paid to play. That's an episode coming up in about a month, I think. So,
I have paid people to play before, so that's actually really exciting, and I can tell you why
it's
we
very
paid
cool.
them.
If you can
Can't
pay
do it
people
all
to
the
play-
time. Can't do it all the time, but
Yeah.
once in a while.
Yeah.
That's the dream, though. Someday.
Yep. All right. Thank you for joining us on Story Talk. We will see you next week, and have a good night, everybody. Bye.
Good night.
Night, everyone.
Sweet. I gotta run.